Don't you forget you're special. Don't you forget you're special.
We were all born different, even those that look alike, even twins of differences and can be identified.
Welcome to The Able Show. I am your host, Celestino Cornel, and I'm joined by three lovely co-hosts, Kendra, Samantha, and Asal, and of course, DJ X-Ray playing the funky beats. Every triumph has a hidden story, one of struggle, perseverance, and transformation. And today, we're gonna shine a very special spotlight on the story of a very special guest whose voice has impacted listeners, whose impact has been felt from the radio waves to the television screen. I am speaking of none other than Tyrone DuBose. DJ X-Ray, take us to commercials and we'll be right back.
I can be a friend who is someone you can vent to when it feels this world's against you and you forget you're special.
Don't you forget you're special.
Tyrone, thank you for coming on the show, man. It's a real pleasure having you.
Absolute honor to be here. Thank you so much to all of you. I appreciate it.
Now, you have a very beautiful story. You know, many of us, we walk through life not really knowing what we're here to do and seeking inspiration. But you've talked about growing up as a kid in Cincinnati and listening to Kasem and finding inspiration that way. Take us back and tell us how that felt.
Well, as a kid, I would always listen to the radio, of course, in the 70s. That was the most important thing that we had to do. And every Saturday, this gentleman would come on the air, and his name was Kasem, and it was the American Top 40, and it was based on the countdown of the top pop songs in America, according to Billboard magazine. And what I liked about him was the fact that he would tell stories and tell where the song was on the charts. And there was something meaningful about that because, to be honest, I was trying to find some sense of purpose to some degree, and I was really inspired by the way in which he spoke to people.
That's cool. When you were listening as a kid, were you like, I want to be on the radio someday?
To some degree, I was. I felt as though, you know, we, as a kid, particularly as a teenager, we're not sure where we're going, whether we have some sense of direction or purpose. And every Saturday, I just made it a point to make sure I always listened to Kasem. I remember my grandmother, sometimes I'd be out on the porch listening to him, even in the wintertime. But it was the fact that I was able to listen to his stories, and he built us up to a story that he had about a particular artist and where they placed in the countdown. And for some reason, that was something that I gravitated to. I wasn't sure where I was headed, but at least I felt as though I was able to hold on to that.
Yeah, it was like something exciting to listen every week.
It was really exciting, and I loved listening to him, and burned out a lot of batteries listening to him on the radio.
Nowadays, you don't have that issue.
No, we don't have that
It's all
issue.
Bluetooth.
Now all we look for are plugs now. Now we just look for plugs.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't look for batteries anymore. Now it's charging.
What was the first step you took?
Well, after leaving Cincinnati, I moved out here to Los Angeles. First, I thought I was going to be a minor league baseball player, and I started there for a while, but sooner or later, I kind of gravitated toward doing public access television. But for some reason, I just felt this need I had a sense of struggle with me because I really wasn't sure how to get to some sense of direction or purpose. And you know, we find a way to survive. You know, in my head, I thought, okay, well, the 9 to 5 pays the bills, the 6 to 10 was the dream, and how you somehow built the empire of some sort. And so little by little, I was kind of being seen in bits and in pieces of things, but I really just hadn't had a place of being able to
what was
cement
that
it.
pivotal moment? Did you come across a mentor or something? Did someone like open the door? Like, how did that work?
I remember at one point I was looking at this thing called LA Radio People. There was a magazine that came out, and they had a place where they had a whole bunch of the old radio stars in Los Angeles that came, and I saw Kasem was going to be there. And I thought, I was like, oh my God, this is a great opportunity. I was like, oh, I can get here. And the truth is I really didn't have a whole lot to, you know, in my life going on in those days. And I said, okay, well, maybe I'll get a chance to meet my idol. And so I got a chance and an opportunity to go there. He had this sweater on and it said studio on it. And I ran to the bathroom, wanted to make sure I looked presentable. And I remember walking over to him and I said, Mr. Kasem? And he said, call me Casey. And I remember saying, "No, I'm not calling this man Kasem. We're not on that, we're not on that level.
That level, right?
Yeah, but I told him about the dream in which I had of wanting to be, in radio. And he told me something, and I remember asking him if I could send him something, and I remember him saying, well, I probably won't get a chance to look at it, but someone told me, send it to him anyway. So I sent it to him, and then I got a phone call.
Wow.
And he said, is this Tyrone? And his voice was unmistakable. And he said, this is Kasem. And he said, did I ask you to send me the clip or whatever I sent him? And I said, Mr. Kasem, look, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean any harm. You were my idol, and I just wanted you to hear it. And he said, now I have to show you how to do it right. He said, come to my house.
Oh my
Whoa,
gosh.
that's not too many people get to meet their idols and have their idols be that catalyst to push them to where they're meant to end up at.
Yeah, that was a big pivotal point for me because, to be perfectly honest, it was all I had to hang on to. And I remember going to his house, and he had taught me a lot about radio in that one day, and he told me that he thought it was a great idea for me to learn the R&B charts. Before then, I was going 145 miles to Barstow every other weekend to make $40 every 2 weeks to be on the air from midnight to 6 a.m.
Wow.
Because I wanted to be in radio that bad.
And you were making that drive every day?
Every other weekend.
Wow.
I'd had a full-time job. I'd get off at my full-time job in Culver City, and then I would drive to Barstow. And there's a McDonald's, a train station. There's a radio station above it. And I'd be on the air from midnight to 6, making $40 every 2 weeks.
Crazy. Wow.
And this was 20 years ago.
That is crazy.
And
see, those are the stories that most people listen. They see what you've done, but they don't know what it took to get there.
Yeah, a lot of times people, they see the glory of who we are, but they don't know the story. And they believe a lot of times it's sunshine and rainbows. But I remember the interview that I had at that radio station in Barstow. And the gentleman said to me, I'm going to give you, if I give you an opportunity, because I'd never been on the radio before, and he said, I'm going to give you the worst times and you're going to get the cheapest amount of pay. And I remember going home, I was married at the time, and I remember telling the ex-wife then, I said—
That's why she's the ex-wife.
That's why she's the ex. I don't need to be on TMZ anymore, let me stop that. And I remember saying to her, I remember telling her about going to this interview, and I had this car that had no air conditioning. I didn't know, I thought Barstow was a beach. I didn't know what it was. And I remember her saying to me, I hate to tell you this, but you're not going to get that job. I'll never forget that. And I thought to myself, I remember calling the guy back. So I was me going on the air, being at a radio station all night, driving 145 miles home and trying to find my way. And the best part about that, obviously, is I persevered.
Yeah.
And
that's incredible. Many people don't.
Yeah.
Because you're literally living with an energy vampire that's trying to rob you and sabotage your dream.
It's hardest to hear that from the person you're closest to.
Right.
Then you're like, you know me so well,
Yeah,
that must be true, but—
yeah, I totally agree. But in my head, I remember going out to the car saying there were two things I was going to do. First, I'm going to get that job, and then I'm going to get rid of her.
That's great.
So, but in my nonetheless, when we're young, when we're not even young, this was 20 years ago, at some point, I just needed to find my way, some kind of way,
and you
to
just
believe it.
broke through. That's incredible. We're gonna go on break, and we'll be right back with more of Tyrone. Welcome back to the ABO Show. We have a lovely guest, Tyrone, speaking to us. So tell us more about how you've persevered through the different struggles, because you've been through some real heavy stuff, and you've still done amazing stuff like becoming an R&B historian. Tell us about that.
Well, as time went on, I was doing well in Barstow on the air, and then a few years later, then I had cancer.
Wow.
And I had to, in my mind, I felt this need of, you go into a sense of shock and you go into a mode of hoping and praying somehow that you make it alive. And I remember saying to myself, I asked God, if you just give me an opportunity to make it right. Everything in my life really wasn't all that great. I wasn't a great dad. I was struggling so bad trying to just figure out a part of my life, and it was difficult for me. But I remember that during the time of cancer, I remember I remember asking God, if I just get a chance, I'll just try to make things right again. I'll be better. I'll go for my dreams, and I'll do my best. I'll do even better. And once you've fought for your life, you don't fight with people anymore. There's after that, you're in a whole different place. And as time went on, I remember one of my friends, Michael Ajakwe, was there. He was doing an Unsung episode on Ray Parker Jr. And he said that he wanted me to do the interviews, but because I had just gotten out of the hospital, my face looked very gaunt, like, I'd just gotten out. You could tell that something was going on. But my chance came years later, about a year or two later, for Sly and the Family Stone. I was sitting next to this gentleman, and as I was talking to him, he said, I wonder if Sly and the Family Stone had any platinum singles. And, I was a Kasem type guy. I said, no, he didn't have any platinum singles. He had the 24th and 25th biggest song. And so the guy's looking it up. He said, what about the Supremes? And then he said the Temptations. And I found myself getting a little irritated. I said, look, sir, I said, the first platinum single in history, I said, was Johnny Taylor, Disco Lady, 1975. And then he said, well, who was number one? I went, Kiss and Say Goodbye to Manhattans. And he said, well, how do you know all this? And then I was telling him, I do this little radio show that I had put together. Yeah. And I gave him a card, and he said, he called me and said, come up to Toluca Lake. And I went, what is that, a beach? So I found Toluca Lake, and the gentleman that I was talking to was the executive producer of Unsung. And that's how I got on the air.
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah, that's how it all began.
How many years were you on that?
I've been on the Unsung episodes since 2012 up until the present. Amazing. And included my first one, ironically enough, is with one of your guests who'll be here today, Midnight Star, who I went to school with, both Reggie and Vincent Galloway.
Wow, that's really incredible. And then you had more stuff that came your way. I know your mother, suffered a tragic, was murdered tragically.
Yeah, it was years later. I had gotten married again, and 15 minutes after I got married, I found out that my mother was murdered.
15 minutes?
Yeah, I found out my mom had been murdered in Cincinnati. And I went on this quest or journey to find the man who murdered my mother. Found him. And for over 25 years, every time he came up for parole, it didn't matter what it took. I made sure I was there. Yeah. During the pandemic, they were going to let him out. And I remember going home. There was no vaccines then. It was me by myself doing everything I could to make sure that the man who had taken my mother away from me stayed in prison.
Stayed away.
As it turned out, they let him out, but he died a year later from cancer, ironically. I never, however, let these things cause me to lose sight or focus of wanting to be someone. And I remember during the period of while he was in prison, I remember watching this Party City commercial about people graduating. And I remember that everyone in my house graduated except for me. And I went back and did all 4 years, the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And I remember that the teacher said, Tyrone, people know who you are as a public figure. This may not be for you trying to I wanted to know what it was like to wear a cap and gown. So, and I said, look, all my life, I'd always taken shortcuts. Yeah. I was like, I need to be able to, my mom, I remember her going to school in the 60s, trying to get her high school diploma, and all her kids, except for me, had graduated. So I'm gonna go do all 4 years. So I went back and did the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade and graduated about 8 years ago. Wow. From high school.
That is incredible.
It was easier for me because, of course, social, social studies part, I lived it through, in my day in the 60s, it was, with Eisenhower and all those people but now it was easier for me then. But I went back and learned, went back to high school.
Was there because I know some people can get like their GED and it's like equivalent. Was there a reason you wanted to do like all 4 years?
You didn't want the shortcut.
One of the biggest problems was in my life, I had always found a way around just finishing. One of the hardest things for me was I don't think anything became real for me until I was real with myself. And I felt as though everybody else graduated, and I knew taking the GED was just once again another shortcut.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know what it was like to wear a cap and gown, and that meant everything to me. And then in my head I went, okay, all of my mom's children graduated.
Yeah.
And that mattered to me at that moment. That was the reason why. For a long time, I think it was hard for me I struggled with being real with myself. But once I figured that out, I got better.
That is incredible. Winning is done, but it's not about how much you do or how far you get. It's how hard you can get hit and still keep moving forward. And you're that type of man, because even through the pandemic, you didn't let that end you. You just pivoted and went in different directions. So tell me about that.
One of the things that ironically changed me was, ironically enough, that particular Rocky scene when I saw it, because Rocky was my idol. And I remember
Rocky
seeing—
was all of our
Yeah,
idols.
and I remember that.
I'm going to pause you there. We're going to go on break, and then I want you to get into it with me, all right? We'll be right back with the Able Show, folks.
We're ready for
Welcome back to the Able Show. We have a lovely guest, Tyrone, and you were just telling us how you pivoted during the pandemic.
Yeah, I remembered seeing that Rocky scene where you had kind of mentioned. And I remember that I went with somebody to see that movie and I started crying when I saw that part. And she said, "What's the matter?" But I knew what was the matter because I remember the part that I remembered him saying was, now if you know what you're worth, you got to go out and get what you're worth, but you got to be willing to take the hits and not walk around blaming it on him or her or anybody else, because cowards do that, and that's not you. I remember that scene so well, but it was a big pivot for me, and I just realized I just need to make this happen because this is all I've got left.
That is incredible.
When did you realize that you made it in your career and you reached your goals? You became a star. When did you notice that?
One of the things that I really try not to say is that I'm a celebrity or a star. I usually just say, well, I'm just a public figure. You know when you've made it when TMZ gets you or something. I don't want to mention that again. Okay, I'll just say that. And I wasn't even doing anything either. I didn't say, but I digress. One of the things that was I think the apex of where I was at was being inducted into the California Music Hall of Fame with Kasem and his daughter.
Wow, with your idol.
Yeah, inducted me in the Hall of Fame last year.
Did you ever have people realizing who you are in public when you go out?
Yeah, it's kind of cool, and you know, I have been around so many people who are public figures. I've learned the way in which to be. Sometimes I go, okay, I like what that person did. Don't do what that person did. You know, one of the things that ironically enough, I thought about a couple of weeks ago, people will, if you go to a lot of red carpet events, they'll have pictures of you. And somebody found a picture of me with a jerry curl, and I just want to qualify this. I did not sign that picture. That one I didn't sign, okay? I didn't sign that picture. I wasn't gonna sign that one. I signed the rest of them, Samantha, but I didn't sign, I didn't sign that.
That is incredible. So what other stuff are you working on now?
Right now, based on my book, because it went to #1 for 8 weeks, it was called The 4 Seasons of R&B, and that's what I did during the pandemic.
What is it called?
It's called The 4 Seasons of R&B, and it was based on my top 10 picks of the best artists from the 1960s through the 1990s. And what was unique about it was that it was the way in which Cheryl Underwood gave me one of the biggest chances I've had when I was on her radio show. And she allowed me to perfect being a R&B historian by helping me to guide my way.
That's amazing.
And then when the book went to #1, it was kind of good. And really good, really good.
I'd say it was really good.
It was really good.
Humble.
But when it kept, now they're making a 3-part series based on the book, and I do a lot of the trivia. So yeah, we're making a TV series, and we just finished it a couple of weeks ago. So I'm really excited about that.
Nice. Do we have an idea when it's coming out?
They won't allow me to say when it's coming out, but they're doing. The good news is I know for sure at least it's coming.
So why
It's
is
in the
it
can.
called 4 Seasons?
It's called the Four. Good question, Samantha. The reason why it's called the 4 Seasons is because R&B really didn't get its kick in as far as American history. It began in the 1960s through the 1990s. Before then, in the 1950s, while there were R&B artists, the number one artist, for example, in the 1950s on the R&B charts was Fats Domino. But the number 2 artist in the 1950s was Elvis Presley on the R&B charts. And there was a time in the 60s when it kind of caught itself and got into mainstream with the Supremes, the Temptations, where it crossed over to the pop charts.
Wow, that's just.
How was that always your favorite genre of music?
No, believe it or not, it wasn't, Kendra. But my favorite was the pop charts because Kasem was all I listened to, and he was the one who said you really need to learn the R&B charts. He said he thought that the R&B acts were fading, and ironically, I remember being at an event with Elton John, and I remember walking over to him going, you had like a Monopoly set, it had sterling silver houses and real gold hotels, and he turned around and he said, how'd you know that? I went, Kasem, 1975.
What do you think about rap or hip hop?
Well, listen, I mean, music evolves. And so it's not that there's anything wrong about it. It all kind of works its way through. To be perfectly honest, a lot of the rap songs in which we hear are some of the beats from the 60s and 70s. For example, the one with How Do You Want It with Tupac actually came from Quincy Jones and Minnie Riperton, and then, so a lot of it is actually R&B music.
So you can't help yourself when you listen to a rap or something be like, oh, they took that from such and
Yes,
such and such.
yes. A lot of times I remember I'll hear a little beat and go, oh, that came from this song. But when I was a kid, my mother always played the stylistics, and it's great because as an R&B historian, you go on tour with a lot of these old school R&B artists, and it's kind of good because it brings you back to some of the times when you were young, and it gave me an opportunity to be well.
So you mentioned you went to high school with the Calloway brothers. What was that like?
You know what was so interesting? Not just the Calloway brothers, the group The Deal with L.A. Reid, all of these people were part of Cincinnati. But the truth of the matter is, Samantha, I was supposed to be in school. I was doing other things. Which is
But
the
you
reason why I had to
finished.
go back to high school. We lived in the same area. They wanted school. I wanted, that's a whole nother, that's a
Right.
There was a lot of distractions.
Yeah, a lot of distractions. Not going to mention her name either, but that's a whole nother. Not going to mention that distraction.
Oh, we're leaving her out.
Yeah, we're leaving her out.
That's another TMZ.
That's another TMZ moment.
But it made you who you are today. And like you said, although you were maybe distracted for a little bit, like during that time, like 8 years ago, you finished school, and that's so incredible.
A lot of times, what I had to learn, Samantha, is that a lot of times people don't want to hear the story of the person who has everything. They want to hear the story of men and women who have endured pain and turned their struggles into a gift. I didn't want anybody to feel sorry for me. At some point, I didn't want to be ordinary. I wanted to find a way to be legendary. I remember going out looking at the Hall of Fame when I got my award, and I remember looking out and I kept thinking to myself, I wish this person was here, I wish that person was here. And then I had to stop myself and go, no, whoever's here supposed to be here. Because the whole time I thought that all of these struggles were holding me back. They were really giving me the tools to become one of the best.
Tools that were building
Yeah.
character.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming.
I'm honored. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
It was a real pleasure.
No, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, my grandson told me about this. This part's good. My grandson told me this. He's 7 years old, and he said to me the other day, he says, Grandpa, now that you're famous, we need to get you some merch. I went, What's his merch look like? He says, well, I got a picture, and I had like one half leg, a big eye, and I was like, okay. But nonetheless, you can reach me on all social media platforms at Tyrone, DuBose, or my website, which is rnbhistorian.com.
Thank you so much.
I'm
for
honored.
joining
Thank you
us.
so much. I'm honored to be here. Thank
And
you.
thank you all for tuning in to another episode of The Able Show. And always remember, you're able to heal, to persevere, and to thrive. Ashe.
Wouldn't they be surprised to see that we're better?